I waited for the perfect time to live. Now it's too late. I waited for the perfect time to live. I didn't call it that back then. I used words that sounded more responsible, smarter, safer. I said I was preparing. I said I was being patient. I said I was doing things in the right order, but all of it meant the same thing. I believed life would begin later, and later never arrived. When you're young, waiting feels harmless. You think time is generous, elastic, something you can stretch and rearrange. You assume the future will be more accommodating than the present, more stable, less demanding. You tell yourself that once a few things fall into place, you'll finally allow yourself to live fully. I told myself that for decades. I grew up watching adults rush through life with tension in their faces. Always tired, always worried, always saying things like one day and someday. I absorbed the lesson without realizing it. Life was something you endured so you could earn moments of relief later. Enjoyment was conditional. Rest was postponed. Dreams were filed away for a future version of yourself who would have more time, more money, more certainty. So I waited. I waited until my career felt stable. I waited until my finances felt secure. I waited until responsibilities felt lighter. Each time I reached one milestone, another appeared immediately behind it. Another reason to delay. Another reason to be practical. Another reason to tell myself, not yet. Waiting became my lifestyle. I wasn't miserable. That's important to say. I wasn't unhappy in a dramatic way. I was functional, productive, reliable. I did what was expected of me. I showed up. I handled my responsibilities. From the outside, my life looked sensible, balanced, respectable. Inside, something was always slightly postponed. There were trips I wanted to take but decided against because it wasn't the right year. Skills I wanted to learn but told myself I'd do later when things slowed down. Conversations I wanted to have but delayed because the timing didn't feel perfect. I assumed opportunity was patient. It isn't. Opportunity doesn't disappear loudly. It fades quietly. It waits for you to stop paying attention. I remember moments that felt small at the time. A friend inviting me somewhere spontaneous and me saying, maybe next time. A weekend free, and me choosing to catch up on work instead of exploring something new. A creative idea that excited me briefly before I dismissed it as impractical. Each decision felt responsible. None of them felt final. That's how the trap works. You don't feel like you're giving up your life. You feel like you're managing it carefully. You tell yourself you're being mature. You believe you're delaying gratification, not eliminating it. You think the version of you who will live fully is just a few steps ahead. I kept moving toward that version, year after year. The problem with waiting for the perfect time is that it requires conditions that never exist simultaneously. You're waiting for certainty in a world that only offers trade-offs. You're waiting for ease in a life that moves in seasons. You're waiting for permission no one is assigned to give you. I didn't understand that. I believed the perfect time would announce itself, that one day I would wake up and feel it, calm, ready, unburdened. I thought something inside me would click and say, now. Instead, what arrived was time itself. Responsibilities didn't vanish, they multiplied. My body changed, energy shifted, recovery slowed. The things I assumed would be easy later became harder without warning. The curiosity I once felt so strongly grew quieter from neglect. And still, I waited. Because by then, waiting was familiar, safe, predictable. I told myself I had already waited this long. What was a little longer? I didn't realize that the cost of waiting increases with age. Not financially, existentially. The same decision costs more later than it does now. I started noticing the difference between people who lived and people who postponed. It wasn't about money or luck. It was about permission. Some people gave themselves permission early. They lived imperfectly, messily, sometimes recklessly. Others, like me, waited for conditions to be ideal. The first group had stories. The second group had plans. I had excellent plans. What I lacked were memories that required courage. There's a specific sadness that comes from realizing you were capable during years you chose not to act. Not because you couldn't, but because you didn't think it was the right time yet. That sadness doesn't crash into you. It settles. I felt it when I noticed how quickly months passed without anything standing out. When days blended together, when excitement was replaced by maintenance. I told myself this was adulthood, that this was normal. But deep down, I knew something was missing. Life was happening. I was preparing. And preparation had quietly replaced participation. The realization didn't arrive in a dramatic moment. There was no accident, no diagnosis, no single event that split my life into before and after. That's what makes it dangerous. It arrived gradually, disguised as routine. It arrived in the way days began to blur together, in the way weeks passed without anything marking them, in the way I started saying nothing much when people asked how I'd been. Nothing much is a warning sign. I began to notice how often I was tired in a way sleep didn't fix. Not exhausted from effort, but dulled from repetition. My days were full, but they weren't alive. They were occupied, maintained, efficient. I was managing a life I hadn't fully entered. Still, I told myself it was temporary. I said, once this project ends, once this obligation eases, once this phase passes. There was always a phase. I started to feel a strange resentment toward people who seemed to live more freely. Not envy exactly, but irritation. They felt irresponsible to me, reckless. How could they take risks when there was so much to manage? How could they choose joy when there were still boxes unchecked? That resentment was my fear talking, because deep down I knew they weren't waiting. They were living alongside uncertainty instead of trying to eliminate it first. I remember a specific afternoon sitting alone scrolling through old photos. Not the highlights people curate, but ordinary moments. I noticed something that stopped me cold. The photos that made me pause weren't the ones where everything looked perfect. They were the ones where something was happening. Movement, laughter, mess, imperfection. I realized how few of those moments I had allowed myself. I had optimized my life for control, not experience. That's when the phrase perfect time finally sounded hollow. I tried to define it honestly. What was I actually waiting for? Less responsibility? That never happens. More certainty? That's an illusion. More energy? Energy fades if you don't use it. More confidence? Confidence grows through action, not preparation. The perfect time was a fantasy I used to justify staying where I was, and staying had become a habit. I also began to notice my body in a new way, not with fear, but with curiosity. Small negotiations appeared. I needed more recovery, more planning. Things that once felt spontaneous now required intention. I hadn't become old overnight, but I had crossed a threshold without realizing it. That's when panic finally surfaced. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that asks questions you can't ignore. How many seasons do I realistically have left? How many chances to do something new before novelty turns into effort? How many times can I keep telling myself soon before soon becomes never? I didn't like the answers. I began to see waiting for what it was, not patience, avoidance dressed up as responsibility. I was avoiding discomfort, risk, and the possibility of regret by choosing the familiar. Ironically, that choice created the very regret I was trying to prevent. You can avoid short-term discomfort and still create long-term pain. That truth settled heavily in me. I tried, clumsily, to change. I said yes to things I would have postponed before. I attempted to break routines that had calcified, but something else became clear very quickly. Starting late is harder, not impossible, but heavier. The same actions cost more effort. The same risks feel steeper. The same learning curves feel longer. Momentum is easier when you start early. I felt like I was trying to run with weights I had been carrying for years without noticing. There was also grief. Grief for versions of myself I never allowed to exist, paths I never tested, skills I never developed, because I assumed there would always be time. I wasn't mourning a single lost opportunity. I was mourning a pattern of delay. I began to understand that life doesn't punish you for waiting. It simply keeps moving. And when you finally look up, it's further along than you expected. The perfect time never came. Time did. Accepting that the perfect time never came was harder than admitting it never existed. There's a difference between intellectual understanding and emotional acceptance. I understood the idea quickly. I accepted it slowly. Acceptance meant letting go of the version of my life I had been postponing for decades. It meant admitting that some doors were not just closed, but gone. That kind of acceptance comes with grief. Not the kind you announce. The quiet kind that sits beside you when the house is still. The kind that surfaces when you realize how many decisions were made out of caution instead of curiosity. How many years were spent managing risk instead of exploring possibility. I had to sit with the truth that I wasn't unlucky. I was careful. And careful is not the same as wise. For a long time, I wanted to blame circumstances, the economy, family obligations, timing, responsibility. But slowly, honestly, I saw the pattern. Even when conditions improved, I still waited. Even when opportunities appeared, I still hesitated. The external reasons changed, but the behavior stayed the same. Waiting had become my identity. I had trained myself to believe that life should feel stable before it feels meaningful. That joy should be earned after control is established. That dreams are dangerous until they're fully planned. None of those beliefs are malicious. They're just incomplete. Life doesn't reward readiness. It rewards participation. By the time I understood that, participation felt intimidating. I didn't trust my instincts anymore. I had overridden them for so long that they spoke softly now. I had to relearn how to listen to desire without immediately suppressing it. That's harder than it sounds. When you spend decades postponing yourself, you forget how to begin. You don't know where to start because everything feels overdue. You look at the distance between where you are and where you thought you'd be, and it feels overwhelming. So I started small. Not because small was ideal, but because it was possible. I took walks without a destination. I said yes to conversations I would have avoided before. I tried things without expecting mastery or payoff. At first, it felt awkward, forced, almost embarrassing, like learning a language late in life. But slowly, something shifted. Presence returned, not the youthful kind, a quieter version, less ambitious, more honest. I began to enjoy moments without needing them to justify themselves. I stopped asking whether something was productive and started asking whether it was alive. That question changed everything. Still, I won't lie to you. There are regrets that don't dissolve. There are versions of life you don't get to revisit. I had to grieve those without turning that grief into bitterness. That took time. Bitterness is seductive when you realize you waited too long. It gives you someone to blame. I resisted it because bitterness would have been another way of not living. Instead, I chose clarity. Clarity that says this: the perfect time is a story we tell ourselves when we're afraid of imperfect action. It feels responsible, but it's a delay tactic. And delay has consequences that compound quietly. If you're listening to this while waiting, still feels safe, I want you to hear this gently, not urgently. You don't need to blow up your life. You don't need to abandon responsibility, but you do need to stop assuming that life will open fully once conditions are ideal. They never are. The window for living doesn't close suddenly. It narrows, slowly, politely, without warning. And one day, you realize you've been aiming your whole life at a moment that never agreed to arrive. I waited for the perfect time to live, and now, many of the choices that once felt flexible feel fixed. I live with that. I make peace with it. I do what I can with what remains. But I would give anything to tell my younger self this one thing. Life is not a reward you earn for being responsible. It's something you participate in while you are capable. Don't wait until your courage feels complete. Don't wait until certainty arrives. Don't wait until you feel ready. Readiness is built by moving, not waiting. The perfect time never came. Time did. and I wish I had met it sooner.